Oh my god, hello all. Good afternoon, and why don't thank you for watching. So this is day 4 of reading Black Rednecks and White Liberals by Thomas Sowell. Far from celebrating the existing culture of the Black community, Dr. Patton, P-A-T-T-O-N, declared in quotes, all improvement must be by an influence from without, which shall quicken and inspire, which shall teach and guide, end quote. This being the purpose of, in quotes, planting and strengthening the educational institutions which operate to change for the better the environment of the colored race in this country, end quote. Now, it seems to me like he's saying to like stop providing them with stuff and then they're going to figure it out. If you're providing them with stuff already and they're resulting to like really like terrible ideas to make money or whatever, like you put something out in the yard and then somebody comes by and steals it and then they go and sell it. That's not cool. Or how about making knockoffs of things? That's not cool. And that's not the only race that does that stuff. I'm just telling you the things that they do. Robbing people, like assault, aggravated robbery, whatever, like those are not great ideas. So do you think taking stuff away is going to make it any better? I feel like it's going to make it worse, but let's read on. Okay. Although there was another educational tradition established at the Hampton Institute in Virginia and transplanted to Tuskegee Institute in Alabama by Booker T. Washington, a graduate of Hampton. This tradition as well was based on replacing the existing culture of Southern blacks with a new imported culture. Hampton Institute's founder, General Samuel Chapman Armstrong, declared that the, in quotes, average Negro student, end quote, needed a residential boarding school that could, in quotes, control the entire 24 hours of each day. Only thus can old ideas and ways be pushed out and new ones take their place, end quote. Booker T. Washington, right? And General Samuel Chapman Armstrong. Anyway, addressing the American Missionary Association in 1877, the principal of Hampton Institute said, and I understand where they're coming from because it's kind of like immersive learning whenever you are like a foreign exchange student or something like that, or you want to do, you really, really, really just want to further your fill in the blank, right? And you take a month-long whatever in a place where you're learning their culture, their language, and all that kind of stuff. So I get that. It's like an immersion experience or something. Anyway. Addressing the American Missionary Association in 1877, the principal of Hampton Institute said, in quote, there is no lack of those who have mental capacity. The question with him is not one of brains, but of right instincts, of morals, and of hard work, end quote. Nobody is saying these people are dumb, okay? It's just they're saying that they haven't been given those morals and values and the like way of doing things and like the mental fortitude and the tenaciousness to do better, like way better than anyone has ever done in the generation before them type mentality, right? Contrary to latter caricatures, neither Hampton Institute nor Tuskegee Institute was based on an assumption that blacks had the capacity to be only hewers, H-E-W-E-R-S, of wood and drawers of water. In short, however, divergent the different schools of thought were on educational philosophy as between the Hampton-Tuskegee approach and the approach of the founders of other institutions for blacks. They were agreed that what was most needed for the advancement of blacks in the postbellum South was a replacement of the culture prevalent around them and among them by a new imported culture. However, the greatest obstacle to creating this new culture was the existing black redneck culture. For many missionaries, the physical problems of overwork, illness, and poor facilities were less frustrated than their everyday dealing with the freedmen, F-R-E-E-D-M-E-N. A constant problem for teachers was student absenteeism. A pupil would attend school for a few days, disappear for a time, then come back again, multiplied by a factor of 40 or 50. This made classroom continuity difficult. This quote-unquote irregularity, said one teacher, was a quote-unquote positive vice of the freedmen. A related weakness was unreliability, in quotes, you can never depend on anything promised, end quote, went a typical complaint. Another, in quotes, general failing among the colored people, end quote, according to many teachers, was their tardiness at meetings, classes, church services, and so on. More serious were sexual offenses, theft, and lying. Many of the teachers blamed such behavior on slavery, but as we have already seen, similar behavior was common among white rednecks on both sides of the Atlantic, people who had never been enslaved. Remarkably, the northern teachers, I mean, come on, you can only blame slavery for like so much. You know what I'm saying? Quit beating the dead horse, quit squeezing the turnip and trying to get blood out of it, right? Ugh. Remarkably, the northern teachers persisted in the face of difficult students and a hostile white southern society from which they were excluded and by which they were sometimes terrorized. What? Remarkably, the northern teachers persisted in the face of difficult students and a hostile white southern society from which they were excluded and by which they were sometimes terrorized. I wonder if it's one of those situations where it's just like, well, you're not teaching my kid. You need to pass my kid. Why are you failing my kid? And then the teacher says, well, your kid hasn't been coming into class. And when they do, they're cutting up, right? Or they're like bullying and ending up in the principal's office. I mean, so like, you know, kind of like now, ain't it? It's the same thing. You hear and you see these videos and all kinds of stuff, and these teachers are freaking tired and they're being blamed for the behaviors that the parents should be dealing with. Anyway, although many teachers burned out in a few years, new teachers continued to arrive from New England and other parts of the North thousands in the post-war decades. When black colleges were founded, New Englanders were again disproportionately represented among their teachers and college presidents, and much of these colleges' philosophy was that of New England. These institutions introduced strict behavioral standards as well as high academic standards, imposing stern discipline and developing self-discipline in a region where such was not the norm for either blacks or whites. Noted black scholar and educator Charles S. Johnson said, in quotes, no less stern rectitude could have broken the grip of habits adjusted to a now outmoded life of irresponsibility and reshaped them to a new and serious purpose, end quote. W.B. Du Bois himself, a New Englander, and with the first PhD from Harvard earned by a black man, declared the movement, in quotes, to plant the New England College in the South, to be, end quote, to be the salvation, this is in quotes, the salvation of the South and the Negro, end quote. Perhaps even more remarkable than these dedicated efforts was the fact that such efforts began to produce educational results early on. In 1871, the Georgia legislature created a board of visitors to attend public examinations at Atlanta University. The chairman of the first board of visitors was ex-slaveholder Joseph Brown, who reportedly said that he expected the examinations to confirm the Negro's inferiority, but the recitations of former slaves in Latin, Greek, and geometry forced from him the confession that, in quotes, we were impressed with the fallacy of the popular idea that the members of the African race are not capable of a high grade of intellectual culture, end quote. And the Atlanta Constitution could hardly, in quotes, believe that we witnessed what we witnessed. To see colored boys and girls 14 and 18 years of age reading the Greek and Latin and demonstrating correctly problems in algebra and geometry appears almost wonderful. Don't let them tell you that people are being left behind. I'm just saying. It's a mental state, okay? People who want it bad enough, they get it. They get the knowledge, right? They quit listening to peers and adults and stuff saying, why are you doing that? Like, that's what white people do. You're just so white. Why are you acting white? Why you gotta be white? You know what I mean? And they ignore all of that. They attend school, they learn, they get the tutoring and all that kind of stuff, right? Anyway. However discordant the philosophy of the American Missionary Association may have been with quote-unquote multicultural views prevailing today, the crucial fact is that it worked as so many of today's notions do not. There was yet another route by which New England culture reached some blacks in the 19th century. Oberlin College was Oberlin College was founded by New Englanders in 1833, and it functioned as a New England college transplanted to Ohio, and quotes, an outpost of New England culture beyond the Appalachians, or Appalachians, however you want to say it, end quote, as one scholar put it. It was also one of the few colleges to which blacks were admitted before the Civil War, as well as being a station on the Underground Railroad through which Southern blacks escaped from slavery. Although blacks were no more than 5% of the students at Oberlin College, Oberlin was a much more significant factor in the higher education of blacks. Of the 309 blacks who were known to have received a degree from a white college in America up through 1899, nearly half, in parentheses 149, received their degrees from Oberlin. The first black woman to receive a college degree in America received it in Oberlin's class of 1862. She became the principal of a remarkable high school for blacks in Washington, D.C., discussed in a later essay as Dunbar High School. Of that school's first 10 principals, 3 were graduates of Oberlin, 2 graduated from Harvard, and 1 each from Amherst and Dartmouth. In essence, most of this highly successful schools, principals during its early formative period had New England educations in a New England culture, whether or not they received that education in New England itself. And I was tripping up because I was thinking about how this lady was the first to receive a degree, right? And this is the first black woman to receive a college degree in America, okay? And she received it in Oberlin's class of 1862. And what did she do with it? She didn't go to some prestigious, like, white fill in the blank, right? She went to give back to her people, right? Like, come on. You have to just, like, you have to want to see your people do better, and then you have to put your hand in the pot to help make, you know, the stew richer for them to consume, and then grow big and strong and smart and all of that. It's a giving back, but it's like, it feels like now they don't give back. They just abandon, you know, and then they say all these things while they're living in their white neighborhood with their gated fence and their HOA. You see what I'm saying? Anyway, a wholly disproportionate share of, let me see, I read all that. I think receive the education in New England. So yeah, a wholly disproportionate share of future black leaders came out of schools and colleges established by New Englanders and the South, not even counting Oberlin College or Dunbar High School, Dunbar High School. These alumni of institutions founded as New England enclaves in the South included W.B. Du Bois, James Weldon, W.L.D.O.N. Johnson, Langston Hughes, Walter White, Mary McLeod, M.C.Leod, Bethune, B.E.T.H.U.N.E., A. Philip Randolph, James Farmer, Thurgood Marshall, and Martin Luther King, Jr. In addition to these individuals from these Southern institutions, the first black man to graduate from Annapolis, Annapolis, the first black woman to earn a PhD, the first black general, the first black cabinet member, and the first black federal judge. These people aren't dumb, y'all. All came from the same public high school, Dunbar High School in Washington, which is culturally New England educated principles in its formative years. I messed that up. But you understand what I'm saying? The height of its whatever, it was culturally New England educated principles is what they focused on. Such concentrations of black pioneers and leaders in a few highly atypical culture enclaves suggest that their achievements were not solely a matter of individual ability, and quotes, cream rising to the top, end quote, but were also a result of a culture very unlike that in which most blacks were raised and educated. However, much of the achievements of these individuals have been celebrated. The culture behind those achievements has not been. Okay, however much the achievements of these individuals have been celebrated, the culture behind those achievements has not. Exactly. Today, the culture that is celebrated in much of the media and in the schools is not the culture that succeeded, but the culture that has failed, the black redneck culture. When white couples who adopt black children are warned to be sure to put those children in touch with their cultural heritage, quote unquote, all too often that means the black redneck culture. Internal cultural differences. Internal cultural differences among blacks have long been extreme, ranging from such things as urbanization, education, and regional distribution to rates of crime, economic achievement, and general acculturation to the norms of the surrounding society. Historically, the most fundamental difference for many generations was between those blacks who were slaves and those who were free. They differed not only in their legal status, but also in their regional distribution, their degree of urbanization, and even biologically. There were free blacks as far back as the 17th century. That means the 1600s, you guys. In fact, there were free blacks before there were slaves in America. The first Africans brought in captivity to colonial Virginia in 1619 became indentured servants, like the white indentured servants who were common in colonial America. Only later, with the mass importation of Africans, did this change. The first law in America recognizing perpetual slavery appeared in 1661 in Virginia. The small class of free blacks in colonial America had fewer restrictions than other free blacks who have in the 19th century, and many of them and their descendants made use of their opportunities. There was a black writer named Gustavus, Gustavus Vassa, Vassa, whose book was popular enough to go through 8 editions. At a time when the vast majority of blacks were still illiterate slaves in the South, Benjamin Banneker, Banneker, was a publisher of almanacs and was also one of those who designed the layout of the city of Washington. Again, long before most blacks were either free or able to read and write. There were not just isolated individual blacks who were culturally more advanced than other blacks, but whole classes of blacks who had achieved cultural levels that most blacks would not achieve until many generations later. The size of the free black population increased after the United States came into existence as an independent nation, as the ideology of freedom associated with the American Revolution led most northern states to abolish slavery. And even in the South, enough white slave owners freed their slaves to cause the free black population there to nearly double and then redouble between 1790 and 1810. Both the regional distribution and the degree of urbanization of free and enslaved blacks differed greatly. After the invention of the cotton gin in 1793, the cotton plantations of the Deep South began to draw slaves away from the upper southern states like Virginia and North Carolina toward more southerly states like Mississippi and Alabama, sometimes as individuals, quote unquote, sold down the river, and often as part of whole plantations that relocated. Thus, the geographic center of the black population moved steadily southwestward at an average of about 50 miles per decade. Meanwhile, the quote unquote free persons of color were moving in the directly opposite direction. While more than 90% of the antebellum black population lived in the South, the quote unquote free persons of color were evenly divided between the states of North and South. And within the South, they tended to leave the Deep South and gravitate toward the region's less oppressive places farther north. The difference in geographic distribution was so extreme that in 1860 there were more free blacks living in the city of Washington alone than in the states of Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia combined. These states having huge concentrations of slaves. The slave and the free also differed greatly in urbanization. While most black slaves worked in rural settings, by 1860, the quote-unquote free persons of color were more urbanized than even the white population. There were cultural consequences to these historic and geographic differences. While the vast majority of slaves could neither read nor write, the census of 1850 showed that most, in quotes, free persons of color, end quote, were literate. But it would be half a century. Did it say literate or illiterate? Let me see, hang on. Yeah, it said literate. Most free persons of color were literate. Come on now. But it would be half a century later to generations after emancipation before the same would be true of the black population as a whole. It would be 1940 before the black population as a whole became as urbanized as the quote-unquote free persons of color were in 1850. The cultural head starts of this segment of the black population had enduring consequences. The descendants of the antebellum, in quotes, free person of color, end quote, remained predominant among black leaders in many fields well into the 20th century, and they included W.B. Du Bois, Thomas Fortune, Charles Waddell, Chestnut, Thurgood Marshall, John Hope, Franklin, and many others. Don't go hang, you, and a good chance. Till we meet again. Love you, man.